Here with us today, we've got two SUVs about the same size, about the same price, even the same color, and they've both got plugs. But there's one big difference between them. This one, it still has a gas engine, while this one, it's a pure EV. Both vehicles, very viable options, but we're here today to figure out which one of them is best for you. We're Edmunds, and we test hundreds of cars each year on the road and at our private track, so you get the most trusted reviews. If you want to know which car, truck, or SUV is the best, then stick with us. You'll hear these referred to as plug-ins or plug-in hybrids for short, but the full name is a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, and that hints at this vehicle's dual nature. Most hybrids are going to allow you to creep around on electric power alone, but only at very low speeds in something like a parking lot. And that's the big difference with the plug-in. It's going to give you a bigger battery and more powerful electric motors, and that's going to allow it to have some upfront electric range before you use any gasoline at all, usually between 20 and 50 miles. And the motors these days, they're powerful enough to even get you up to highway speeds, no problem. Plug-ins, they do generally cost a lot more than their hybrid counterparts, but that flexibility is what you're paying for. This can be an EV for most of your day-to-day tasks, and if you need to go on a longer trip, you can just fill it up at a gas station like a regular car without waiting at a charging station. Now, an EV, you know what that is. It's got electric motors and a battery, and you can only fill it up by plugging it in. And generally speaking, EVs are going to offer you more performance and more power than their gas or slightly electrified counterparts. And they're usually quieter on the road as well. Now, a modern EV, it's generally going to offer you about 250 to 400 miles of range on a full charge, but that of course is going to vary depending on what you buy. The big downside to an EV though is charging. So if you don't have charging at home, charging in public can be difficult, and if you're planning on going on a road trip, you're gonna have to plan those stops along the way. I've taken a lot of long journeys in EVs, and range anxiety, it's a real thing, even if they have really big batteries. These two Toyotas that we have with us today, they're stand-ins for the type of vehicle, an EV and a PHEV. So if you're trying to figure out which one you should buy, you should head over to Edmunds and check out our rankings for both electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. You can either scan the QR code or find the links in the description. We're going to start here behind the wheel of the RAV4. We've got the battery fully juiced up to give us the most EV experience that we can. And because plugins, they have basically two powertrains mashed into one vehicle, they also have a bunch of different drive modes and settings, more than your standard gas car or even an EV. And we're gonna go through those because they can seem a bit overwhelming at first, but we believe in you. So you've got your standard drive modes like Eco, Sport, and Normal here in the RAV4, but on top of that, you've also got three different powertrain settings depending on whether you want to use gas or if you want to use electricity. So there is an EV mode, that's pretty self-explanatory. It's going to lock you into just using the battery. And there's also an auto mode, which is going to flip between the two, but it's going to default into using electric power first because it's more efficient and it's going to save you money at the pump. Now, it's also got a hybrid mode, which is going to lean more on that gas motor. And it's also going to hold the state of charge of the battery constant. Now, you might be wondering why it's useful to hold your battery charge constant. And that's because PHEVs, they're generally a lot more efficient using their energy at city speeds than on the highway. So if you want to use this vehicle in the most efficient way possible, thinking about the two powertrains, you would actually use hybrid mode on the highway. And then once you hit that off ramp, flip it into EV mode where you can maximize the electric range. One thing to watch out for, when you are using the EV only mode in a plug-in hybrid, it's going to be slower than when it's operating with the gas engine as well. We had a GR Sport version of this RAV4 at our test track, and the gap in 0 to 60 mile per hour times was about 3 seconds when you were using hybrid versus electric only modes. We also had a Prius plug-in in recently, and that also had roughly the same gap in its acceleration. Now, the nice thing about this RAV4 plug-in is that it has an electric-only top speed of well over 80 miles per hour, so you can take it on the highway using the electric motors alone. Not all plug-ins can do that. I'm thinking of the Hyundai Tucson PHEV and the Kia Niro plug-in in particular. Both of those, they like to turn on that gas engine a lot more, and you're probably not going to be able to get on the highway without using gas. One thing to watch out for with the Toyotas though is that when you're in EV mode, it's going to really lock you into EV mode and you're not going to get any extra help from that gas engine even if you floor it. That's fine in most situations, but if you're on the highway and you're nearing that top speed, the acceleration really tapers off, so you might have some trouble passing someone or merging quickly in those situations. Probably best to put it in hybrid mode. However, on city streets, while in EV mode, this thing is going to basically give you a full EV experience. It's going to feel peppy, it's going to be comfortable, it's going to be quiet, and it's going to be great for day-to-day driving. Now, once you use up all that electric range, this thing is just going to drive like a normal hybrid because it keeps some battery in reserve to help it to do so. It is slightly less efficient. This is going to return 36 to 40 mpg combined with all-wheel drive, while the standard RAV4 hybrid with all-wheel drive, you're going to get 38 to 43 mpg. So the best way to use this is to keep it juiced up and use that electric power as much as possible. Now, if the plug-in life sounds intriguing to you and you're thinking about trading in your current set of wheels to give you a head start towards your next new car, at Edmunds, we've got a tool to help you do just that. Just go to edmunds.com/sellmycar for an instant cash offer. Now, driving around in an EV is going to be a lot simpler because it's just got that single power source. The biggest thing that you're going to be able to change is actually, instead of how it accelerates, how it slows down, because EVs have different levels of what we call regenerative braking. Now, regenerative braking is different from the physical brakes because it's designed to, as you're slowing the car down, re-harness some of that energy and put it back into the battery. And just like all EVs, this BZ is going to have several different settings for that. And we should mention that most plugins, they're also going to allow you to change the amount of regenerative braking. The higher, the more energy you're putting in, but it might not be as comfortable to drive. Now, the one thing that the BZ doesn't offer that we like seeing in most EVs is a one-pedal drive mode, and that allows you to drive around and stop at like a stoplight or a stop sign without ever touching the brake pedal. Now, this isn't a feature that everyone loves to use, but we at least like having the option. Now, this version of the BZ we're driving today, this is the single motor sort of extended range version. So it's not going to be nearly as quick as the all-wheel drive version, which has one more electric motor, but it still gets from 0 to 60 in under 7 seconds, and it still feels pretty quick, more than enough power for day-to-day driving. Now it's time to talk charging, which is super exciting, I know, but you should pay attention because I actually think that access to charging and the type of charging that you have at home will be a big deciding factor when you're picking between these two types of vehicles. Now, one of the advantages of the plug-in, it's simply going to have a much smaller battery than you're going to find in an EV. Between the two SUVs that we have here today, the battery in the RAV4, it's less than 1/3 of the size in terms of capacity than the one in the BZ. And that means that you can charge this plug-in overnight at home without any special equipment. You can simply just plug it into the wall, and when you wake up in the morning, you're gonna have most, if not all, of that range back. If you want to charge faster, there's always the option of installing a level 2 charger at your home. That can cost up to a few $1,000s though, but it will bring the charge time for this vehicle from overnight to just a few hours. Level 2 charging is something we're going to cover a bit more when we start talking about EVs, because I think that's a necessity if you're going to own one of those, but for a plug-in, it's more of a nice to have. Some plugins are starting to offer fast charging capability, like this RAV4 and like a few of the plugins from Mercedes-Benz. Now that's going to allow you to put range back into the battery really quickly, but that's not something that we would suggest doing often because charging on a public fast charger, it can get quite expensive. We did the calculations. It's actually cheaper to drive per mile with a fuel-efficient hybrid, even with gas prices this high, than it is to charge at a public fast charging station. Now, if you're going to own an EV like this BZ, having a level 2 charger at home is really important because this SUV, it's got about an average size battery for an electric vehicle, just over 77 kilowatt hours. And if you wanted to plug this in on a household outlet and charge it, it would take just over 3 days. With a level 2, that time shrinks down to 8 hours, so you could also fill this overnight if you have that type of charger installed. If you're on the go and you want to use a public fast charger, if you can find one that's working well enough and quick enough, this will go from 10 to 80% in about 30 minutes. And funnily enough, that's about how long it would take that RAV4 on a fast charger to fill its battery about the same amount. Now it's time to talk value, which is a very interesting conversation between these two vehicles because again, they have roughly the same price. But we're gonna start with the RAV4 plug-in. Now, plug-in hybrids, they do command a premium over their regular hybrid counterparts, usually between $5,000 and $10,000. For this RAV4 plug-in, if you compare the price difference between the same trims and equipment, just different powertrains, the gap is actually $5,400. And the reason for that is because with the plug-in, you're again paying for basically two powertrains crammed into one vehicle. Now, the quickest way to make up the price difference between those two when it comes to the cost of fueling them is going to be driving them on electric power as much as possible. The less gas you use in the plug-in, the less you'll be paying to fill it up, and that will eat into that difference. But it's still going to take you quite a long time to make up the price difference. Now, because hybrids are just naturally so efficient, they don't cost a ton to fill up. So we did the math. If you drove 10,000 miles a year with this RAV4 plug-in, and we assumed, and this is a very big assumption, you use zero gas, it would still take you between 6 and 7 years to make up the price difference. We should note as well that gas, it does go stale in the tank, so about every 6 months or so with the plug-in, you should be making sure that you're using some of the gas up. Conventional wisdom once held that electric vehicles cost a lot more than their gas-powered counterparts. However, if we start looking at EVs versus PHEVs, we see that that's just simply not the case. Take these two Toyotas, it's actually the electric vehicle that costs less than the plug-in version. And if we get outside of the Toyota universe, it's also true when we look at something like Hyundai. The Hyundai Ioniq 5, that's going to have a lower price than a similar trim level of the Hyundai Tucson PHEV. Energy prices, like fuel prices, they are going to vary over time, and especially the time of day that you're charging, because off-peak hours is just going to simply cost you less. But a good rough estimate to use is 18.8 cents per kilowatt, and that means filling up this BZ, it would cost you about $14. And one more thing too, remember, if you're going to have an EV and you want to charge it at home, that level 2 charger, it's pretty much going to be a must, and it's going to cost you a couple $1,000s to install one of those, so factor that into your calculations as well. Before we wrap things up, if you've been enjoying our videos, please give us a like and subscribe. That's the best way to help us to make more of them. And if you have any questions about PHEVs or any type of vehicle, let us know in the comments below. We do read them all. To me, PHEVs are a vastly underutilized automotive resource, and the biggest impediment to their wider adoption is educational, and that's part of the reason that we made this video. And it's also true that plugins have come a long way. My parents actually owned the very first Prius plug-in, and that had a whopping 11 miles of range and couldn't go over 50 miles per hour on electric power alone, very different than the RAV4 that we have here today. And that's going to be the biggest selling point for a plug-in hybrid. It's going to give you the best of both worlds. And this RAV4, we actually put it on a modified version of our range test run at city speeds, where we think people will use a plug-in the most. And it actually went well past its EPA estimate, and it covered 62 miles. And that is more than enough to cover the day-to-day driving for the vast majority of Americans. And then of course, backing it up is that gas engine, so it will function as a pretty efficient hybrid once the electric power runs out, and that makes it much more feasible if it's going to be the only vehicle that you own. Having an EV, it does come with some constraints, and it does come with some extra considerations. So if I was looking for one vehicle to put in my garage to be my only do-everything vehicle, I think I would actually lean towards a plug-in hybrid. But for some people, the EV will still be the better choice. Perhaps you just don't want to use gasoline at all with its volatile pricing and environmental implications, or you just like driving an EV because they're going to offer you more performance and they're just so quiet and smooth when you're driving around all the time. And if you have access to level 2 charging, whether it's at home or at work, you really won't need to worry about public charging at all unless you're gonna go over 250 or 300 miles on a single trip, which actually happens a lot less often than you would think. So there you have it. Hopefully now you feel a lot more equipped to make this decision for yourself if you're trying to pick between these two vehicles. And for me, now I've just got to decide which one I'm gonna take home after this shoot. Thanks for watching.